Yes, a very good morning to all of you, and I welcome you all to this institution 35 model. Online students, offline students have already been coming to school, but this is my first interaction with the online students. So I have sent all the links to you people, whatever groups and whatever subjects you want to take, you have to join those WhatsApp groups. Okay, so we are going to start with our book. This is the book Hornbill. If you haven't bought it, just buy it. This is the main book. Okay, main textbook is this one. Second one is your. This is the We are going to start with the very first chapter, the Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. I had asked my offline students to read about Khushwant Singh a little bit. Can anyone just talk about him? Who was Khushwant Singh? What do you know about him? Who was Khushwant Singh? Then I'll come to online students also, if you know about him. Who was Khushwant Singh? And what was he famous for? A train to Pakistan. Okay, he had written this BA2. Somebody wants to join by the name BA2, BA second. So why would I allow? So please join with your own name and your section. Time and again I've mentioned this because if somebody tries to join by the name Devil, so I would not allow such kind of entries. Khushwant Singh, a very famous author. He was a novelist and he had been with the newspapers also. He was a journalist too. He had written a very famous novel, A Train to Pakistan. That was about what was it all about? About partition and the turmoil and the difficulties the people had to go through because of partition of India and Pakistan. Okay, and turn your videos on. Suryanshu and Kanika, please turn your videos on. Okay, so while we would go through this chapter, you would come across various expressions. You understand the meaning of expressions? What are expressions? Yes? Yes, you would come across various expressions and you have to infer their meanings from the context. What do you mean by this? See, words have their meanings only in the context in which they are used. Okay, so words do not stand in air. Okay, they don't hang in air. So you have to find out their meanings from the context in which they are used. It is not necessary that for each and every word you have to look into a dictionary. You can find out, you can judge their meanings from the context in which they are used. So this is what you would be doing and you would be telling me, okay, as we would read the chapter. Okay, and so these are some of the expressions that you would come across, and those expressions are: the thought was almost revolting, an expanse of pure white serenity, a turning point, accepted her seclusion with resignation, a veritable bedlam of chirrupings, frivolous rebukes, the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum. Some of the expressions that you would come across, okay, in the text, and you have to infer the meanings from the context. Okay, even if you're not having the books today, you are excused, but please buy them. Okay, and online students also, please buy the books, and they're readily available because we haven't had any change in the syllabus for the last so many years. First, see, if anybody wants to join by some any other name, क्योंकि वो अपने मम्मी पापा या सिस्टर ब्रदर किसी के भी आप ईमेल आईडी से ज्वाइन कर सकते हो, बट टेल मी बिफोर हैंड. आप सुबह ही जिस दिन मैं आपको लिंक बताती हूँ ना कि कल क्लास है, तो सुबह ही मुझे बता देना आपने, ठीक है? अदरवाइज आई विल नॉट अलाउ. ठीक है? ओके बलराम, यस, सुन नहीं रहा. ओके, माय ग्रैंडमदर, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. You must have your grandmothers at home, so they are generally old. So that is why he says, like everybody's grandmother was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. This means that the author is here at this point of time, he's 20 years old. So he says, I had known her for the last 20 years and she had been like that only. Okay, and see, English would be taught in English only. I know that many of you have come from Punjab School Education Board. Many of you have come from Himachal or Haryana Board. But we cannot, teach English in Haryanvi or Punjabi. So I would try and translate some of the things, but not each and everything. ठीक है, बीच में मैं हिंदी भी बोलूँगी, पर हर एक चीज़ हिंदी में नहीं होगी, because you have to respond in English in your exam. आप English का पेपर हिंदी में नहीं दे सकते हो, बाकी सब्जेक्ट्स का दे सकते हो, English का नहीं. So try and understand it in English and try and speak in English also in the class. Okay, so people said that she had once been young and pretty, but Anne had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. Why was it hard to believe for Khushwant Singh that that his grandmother was once young and pretty? He had seen her old. Since the time he was born, he had seen her old and wrinkled, and he had not seen his grandfather. So it was difficult for him to imagine that his grandmother had a husband also. Okay? And please don't switch off your videos time and again. Just keep them on. They should be turned on. Okay? My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. What is a mantelpiece? Mental piece, mental. It is not metal, it is mental piece. It says my grandfather's portrait hung above the mantel piece. Yes, you have a fireplace and you have a shelf over that. Okay, where you keep all the decoration pieces and all. So the portrait was hanging above the mantel piece. Okay, and what's a portrait? A picture, a sketch. Okay, so he wore a big turban. Who wore a big turban, Paramveer? Who wore a big turban? He says he wore a big turban. Yes. The narrators, Khushwant Singh's grandfather, wore a big turban and loose fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. So, from that portrait of his grandfather, he looked so old as if he, when he died, he was 100 years old. Okay, so he looked so old, white beard, long white beard, and white hair, so he thought that maybe when he died he was 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. Again, the same thing, you know, like he had not seen his grandfather, and from the portrait that was hanging, he looked so old. So, such a person would have only grandchildren. Okay, and the same reason, because he had seen him like that only. He had not seen him actually, but he had seen the portrait like that. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. What do you mean by this? The thought was revolting. Opposite of what you expect, of what you feel, or what you think or imagine. So he had seen his grandmother old, so imagining her as once being young, once being pretty, or as a child playing games, it was difficult for him to imagine. Got it? आ रहा है समझ सुजंत कुछ कुछ? ठीक है, कुछ कुछ तो आ रहा होगा. हाँ जी. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child. So she would tell us of all the games that she would play. ठीक है, बचपन में जितनी भी वो गेम्स खेला करती थी वो हमें बताती थी. And that seemed quite absurd. What is absurd? Weird. Weird. That was very, it was very strange. Why? Because I couldn't imagine her. My grandmother in the form of a child, I could not imagine. Okay? And undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. What are fables? Stories and folk tales with a moral lesson. So she would tell us so many stories, and this was for us. My grandmother as a child was also kind of a story. ठीक है, एक कहानी की तरह हमें लगता था. Okay, she had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Why was she bent? Because of old age. That is why she could move with a stoop. ठीक है, तो झुकी हुई थी वो. Okay, her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. That means her entire face was full of wrinkles. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her. So we were very much sure that she had been old right from the beginning. Old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older. She was so old that we thought that she couldn't have grown older than that. And had stayed at the same age for 20 years, because for the last 20 years we had been seeing her like that only. So she was the same. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. What do you mean by this? Yes, Maitri. With her soul, with her heart, so she radiated beauty from inside. She was beautiful from inside, not from her physical appearance, but from inside. Okay? Got it? She hobbled about the house in spotless white, with one hand resting on her waist to balance a stoop, and the other telling the beads of a rosary. What do you mean by this? She hobbled about the house. Online students, what is hobbling? Hobble means? Saloni? Yes? jump. So the thing is that she would jump. An old lady like her, it was difficult for her to even walk properly, and she had to, balance herself by, keeping her hand on her waist. So what could it mean, hobble? Yes. Sorry. Maybe Kanika, you speak. Kanika, bolo. Her back was bent. Yes. And she hobbled. Hobbled means what? When you walk into slight difficulty. So that is why she hobbled about the house in spotless white with one hand on her waist and the other hand in order to just balance her stoop. What is stoop? Balance is stoop means when you're bent, you know. And the other telling the beads of a rosary. So continuously she would tell the beads of a rosary. Continuously वो माला जपती रहती थी, ठीक है? और मुश्किल से चलती थी, एक हाथ ऐसे रख के और दूसरा हाथ माला जप, ठीक है? Okay. And her silver locks, they were scattered untidily over her pale puckered face. What are silver locks? Gray hair. They were all scattered. She was very old, so the hair was gray and they were scattered or untidily over her pale puckered face. What is puckered? Full of wrinkles. We've already read it. Okay? Wrinkles, झुर्रियों से भरा हुआ. Okay. And her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. What is inaudible prayer? That you can't hear. Inaudible means inaudible. Yes. Inaudible is that you cannot hear. So she would continuously keep on singing. So she would continuously keep on praying, but we couldn't hear that prayer. हम सुन नहीं पाते थे, वो continuously कर वो गाती रहती, ठीक है? Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. Just imagine that landscape in the mountains, how beautiful it looks. So she was just like that. She was as beautiful as that. An expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. What is expanse of pure white serenity? What is serene? Serene का मतलब बता सकता है कोई? Peaceful, something that gives you, peace and something which is very calm. So she was like, she was. It was as if she was breathing peace and contentment, satisfaction everywhere. She was so satisfied with her life, satisfied with herself, with everything around her. Okay, my grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. Who were constantly together? The grandmother and grandson. And who was the grandson? Yes. Yes, the writer. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. So what would she do? She would pray in a monotonous sing song. What is monotonous sing song? Vani Bhala. No, it is not an old Christian song. What is monotonous? Yes, something which you do as a routine. That is monotonous and it becomes a monotony. रोज आप वही काम करो, रोज सुबह उठो, नहाओ धो, स्कूल आओ, घर जाओ, खाना खाओ, सो जाओ, काम करो, फिर अगला. So this is a kind of a monotony. Okay, something is as which you do as a routine. जो routine बन जाए वो monotonous है. So she would sing it as a monotonous sing song while she bathed me and while she dressed me in the hope. And why would she sing it every day? In the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. अगर कोई चीज आप हर रोज सुनते हो, अभी आप स्कूल में आना शुरू हो कितने दिन से? 2 दिन से. इस 2 दिन से 3 दिन से, और इतने दिनों में आप में से रेगुलरली शायद 1-2 बच्चे होंगे जो रोज आ रहे हैं, बाकी कोई एक दिन आए. एक दिन में जो सुबह प्रेयर होती है आपको याद नहीं है ना? नहीं हुआ ना याद? मगर आप उसको रोज सुनोगे आपको याद हो जाएगा, ठीक है? नेशनल एंथम सबको आता है क्योंकि आपने सुन सुन के याद किया है, ठीक है ना? वो अनकॉन्शियस, अगर आप कॉन्शियस एफर्ट भी नहीं करोगे तो भी याद हो जाएगा, ठीक है ना? सो वो रोज सुनोगे आपको याद हो ही जाएगा, ठीक है? सो दैट इज व्हाई शी वुड सिंग इन द होप दैट Pushwan Singh would learn it, okay, by heart. I listened, and he says I listened because I loved her voice but never bothered to learn it. She had such a melodious voice, इतनी मधुर थी उनकी आवाज कि जब मैं सुनता था मुझे अच्छा लगता था, मैंने कभी कोशिश ही नहीं करी याद करने की. ठीक है. And then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot and a red pen, tie them all in a bundle and hand it to me. ठीक है. अब तो आपके पास नोटबुक्स हैं, पहले तो स्लेट हुआ करती थी ना, ठीक है, और उसके ऊपर लिखते थे आप चौक से. ठीक है. So this is what she would fetch me, and she would wash it every day. She would plaster it for me. After a breakfast of a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it. Now you would think कि वो उनको बासी चपाती क्यों खिलाती थी? Can anyone think of the reason? No, she would feed her grandson also. For the dogs, she would keep him aside, but she would also feed Pushpan Singh stale chapati. Why? Yes. Huh? No, because it is considered good for digestion. ठीक है. आप अपनी दादी नानी से पूछो कि रात को खाना अगर चपाती बना के रख दो और उसको अगले दिन सुबह खाओ तो उसके क्या फायदे होते हैं, फिर वो बताएंगे आप. ठीक है. सो शी वुड फीड खुशवंत सिंह दैट स्टेल चपाती विद बटर एंड शुगर, एंड शी वुड आल्सो कैरी सम स्टेल चपातीज फॉर द विलेज डॉग्स टू फीड देम. ठीक है. समझ गए? पीछे आ रहा है समझ? She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. She was a very religious-minded lady. So if you are asked about the character sketch of the grandmother, I'm reminded of an incident when we had given this question. Draw a pen picture of the grandmother. No? And a student had very beautifully drawn up, he had drawn a pen and a picture of an old lady. Okay? So if you're asked to draw a pen picture or to write a character sketch, it's one and the same thing. आपको character sketch बनाना नहीं है, आपको characteristics लिखने हैं. ठीक है. It had come as a long answer question और उसने बड़ा सुंदर पेन और एक फोटो बना दी थी, sketch बना दिया था grandmother का. ठीक है. So this is one of the characteristics, that she was a very kind-hearted lady because she used to feed the village dogs, and then she was a very religious lady. Every day she would accompany her grandson to school. And why would she do so? Because his school was attached to the temple. Temple के साथ था इसलिए. ठीक है. The priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer, while the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayer in a chorus. What is singing in a chorus? In a group together. छोटे बच्चों को जब पढ़ाया जाता है, ठीक है, तो वो उनको बोलते हैं, टीचर बोलते हैं मेरे साथ रिपीट करो. ठीक है. And they all speak together. So that is in a chorus. ठीक है. परमजीत आ रहा है समझ बेटा? My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. Where would she sit? Inside the temple, reading scriptures. What are scriptures? Religious books, holy books. ठीक है. ग्रंथ जिनको बोलते हो. ठीक है. When we had both finished, what had they finished? When we had both finished, the grandson had finished the school. Grandson had finished the school, and grandmother, we had both, and the grandmother had finished her prayers and reading of scriptures and worship and all. We would walk back together. This time the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. Every day, because we would feed them, so they would be waiting for us at the door of the temple. रोज हमारी वो wait कर रहे होते थे वहाँ पे. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. What do you understand by growling? Growling का मतलब क्या होता है? Making a low noise that dogs actually make before they start barking. ठीक है? That is growling. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. They sent for us मतलब asked us to come to settle in the city. ठीक है. जब वो पहले तो वो जब गए थे तब वो खुद ही सेटल नहीं हुए थे, इसलिए मेरे को उन्होंने कहाँ छोड़ दिया था? तेरी ग्रैंडमदर के पास. जब वो कंफर्टेबली सेटल हो गए तो उन्होंने हमें सिटी में बुला लिया. That was a turning point. Underline this. This can come as a question. What was the turning point in the friendship between Kushwan Singh and grandmother? This was a turning point when they were called to the city. And why was this a turning point? Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. And why? Because I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. पहले तो वो village में छोड़ने जाती थी उनको और टेम्पल में। यहाँ पे वो स्कूल दूर है और वो मोटर बस से जाता था, तो वो कैसे जाती? सो दैट वाज अ टर्निंग पॉइंट. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. ठीक है, अब सड़कों पे वैसे डॉग्स भी नहीं घूमते थे, तो what did she start doing now? She started feeding the sparrows को feed करना उन्होंने शुरू कर. Years rolled by, we saw less of each other. Who saw less of? Grandmother and Ishwarti. We have only two characters here in the story. And it's a loving tribute that he has paid to his grandmother. This is what the chapter is all about. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. कुछ देर तक उन्होंने वही रूटीन को उठाया, मुझे तैयार किया. ठीक है, जब मैं स्कूल से वापस आता था वो मुझसे पूछती थी. She would ask me what I did, what I learned at school. I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning, the law of gravity, Archimedes principle, the world being round, etc. मैं उनको ये सब बातें बताता था जो उनको समझ नहीं आती थी. ठीक है, I would talk about English words. I would talk about Western science and learning, the law of gravity, Archimedes principle. एक uneducated old lady को क्या समझ में आएगा? नहीं आएगा ना. ठीक है. So this made her unhappy. She was very unhappy because she was not able to help me in my studies. When I was in the village, she would help me. ठीक है, और वहाँ पे हमें रिलीजियस बुक्स वो भी पढ़ाया जाता था, क्योंकि आपको रिलीजन के बारे में आपके जितने बड़े बुजुर्ग हैं आपको बहुत अच्छा समझा सकते हैं. ठीक है, तो वो उनको बहुत अच्छा लगता था. यहाँ नहीं अच्छा लग रहा. ठीक है, so she could not help me with my lessons. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school, and she was distressed. What is distressed? Very sad. She was very sad. She was very unhappy. ये क्या करा रहे हैं मेरे बच्चे को स्कूल में? ठीक है, she was very sad. ठीक है, that there was, and she was sad that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures. वो कहते कोई religious teaching ही नहीं होती schools में. ये कैसे स्कूल है आजकल? ठीक है, one day I announced, और पहले तो वो इस चीज से दुखी थी. एक दिन आके मैंने अनाउंस कर दिया that we were being given music lessons. ठीक है, अब उनके जमाने में this music had very lewd associations. Lewd means very vulgar. It had very vulgar associations कि बड़े मतलब cheap, मतलब ये नहीं, मतलब नॉर्मल जो जेंटलमैन हैं या बच्चे हैं, मतलब अच्छे घरों के बच्चे, ये नहीं म्यूजिक सीखते, ये नहीं गाना बजाना. गाना बजाना तो बेगर्स का काम है. दिस इज व्हाट वाज हर थिंकिंग. ओके, एट दैट हर परसेप्शन एट दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम. पुराने जमाने की बात है. ठीक है, एंड शी वाज वेरी डिस्टर्ब. उनको बहुत ही बुरा लगा. टू हर म्यूजिक हैड lewd associations and it was the monopoly of harlots and beggars. Harlots means singers, and beggars. Okay, and not meant for gentle folk. It was not meant for gentle people, gentlemen. She said vulgar. Okay, and she said nothing, even though she did not express her opinion about this thing. She didn't say anything, but her silence meant disapproval. You must have heard this, that silence speaks more than words. उन्होंने कुछ कहा नहीं, मगर उनके साइलेंस से क्या पता चल रहा था that she did not like this, she did not agree to it, and she totally disapproved of it. Okay, she did not approve of her grandson being taught music, taking music lessons at school. Okay, she rarely talked to me after that. मेरे साथ उन्होंने बातचीत करना बहुत ही कम कर दिया. ठीक है, when I went up to the university, I was given a room of my own. Because I was now in a university. जब यूनिवर्सिटी में बच्चा होता है तो वो उतना नहीं होता ना, उसका पढ़ाई भी बहुत ज़्यादा है, तो हायर स्टडीज़ के लिए उसको रात रात को जागना भी पड़ सकता है. So he was given a separate room. Okay, and the common link of friendship was snapped. So if you are asked a question, when was the link of friendship snapped between the author and his grandmother, it was the time when he started going to the university and he was given a separate room. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. What is accepting seclusion with resignation? Seclusion क्या होता है? Loneliness. Yes. Seclusion is loneliness, and resignation means yes, just leaving it, not talking about it, and just accepting it as it is. And she didn't say much. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. उसके बाद she devoted most of her time of the day to spinning. Okay, spinning on the wheel. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her wheel, spinning and reciting prayers. ठीक है, spinning करते हुए और prayers गाते हुए वो सारा दिन निकाल देती थी. स्पिनिंग क्या है? चरखा चलाना, ठीक है, ओके। ओनली इन द आफ्टरनून शी रिलैक्स्ड फॉर अ व्हाइल टू फीड हर स्पैरोज, ठीक है। दैट वाज द हैप्पीएस्ट टाइम of the day for her, when she would feed the sparrows, okay. Oh, and while she sat in the veranda breaking the bread into little bits, hundreds of little birds collected around her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirpings. What is veritable bedlam? Veritable is something which is real, and bedlam is a kind of a noise which creates a lot of confusion. आपके आसपास 100-200 चिड़ियाँ आके चहचहा रही हैं और चिरपिंग कर रही हैं, ठीक है, चिड़ियों की आवाज़, वो बहुत शोर होता है, ठीक है. सो इट वाज लाइक so much of noise and so much of confusion, and some came and they perched on her legs. Perching means sitting. Some came and sat on her legs. कुछ उनकी टांगों पे बैठ जाती थी. Some on her shoulders, कुछ कंधों पर. Some even on her head, कुछ उनके सिर पे भी बैठ जाती थी, ठीक है. But she smiled and she never shooed them away. What is shooing away? Turning away. भगाना भी, चलो चलो चलो. तो इरिटेट हो जाते हैं कि ये क्या है, एक भी आके बैठ जाए तो यहाँ पे तो इतनी सारे इकट्ठे होके आ जाती थी. बट शी नेवर शूड देम अवे, एंड इट यूज्ड टू बी द हैप्पीएस्ट हाफ आवर ऑफ द डे फॉर हर. वी हैव ऑलरेडी डिस्कस्ड इट, ठीक है. When I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. अब यूनिवर्सिटी के बाद मुझे और हायर एजुकेशन के लिए कहाँ जाना था? फॉरेन कंट्री. अब मुझे लगा कि मेरी ग्रैंडमदर बहुत दुखी होंगी. एंड व्हाई वुड शी बी अपसेट? Because I would be away for 5 years, and at her age one could never tell. What could not one tell? Yes, that it wasn't. She wasn't. People were not sure whether she would survive for another 5 years because she was so old. Okay, and he was going for 5 years. Maybe when he would come back, she would not be there. She would die. She would have died. Okay, so that is why she was very upset. I was sure that she would be upset. ठीक है, मुझे ऐसा लगा कि वो बहुत अपसेट होगी. ये ऑथर सोच रहा है, ठीक है, नरेटर सोच रहा है, खुशवंत सिंह सोच रहा है. बट माई ग्रैंडमदर को मगर नहीं, ऐसा उन्होंने कुछ नहीं दिखाया मुझे, ठीक है. शी वॉज नॉट इवन सेंटिमेंटल. उन्होंने एक आंसू नहीं बहाया. शी वॉज नॉट इमोशनल एट ऑल व्हेन शी केम टू सी मी ऑफ एट द स्टेशन. ठीक है, मुझे रेलवे स्टेशन पे वो छोड़ने के लिए आई और वो कोई इमोशनल नहीं थी, ठीक है, जबकि मुझे लगा था कि वो बहुत दुखी होंगी. शी केम टू लीव मी एट द स्टेशन बट डिड नॉट टॉक और शो एनी इमोशन. Her lips moved in prayer. वहाँ पे भी she was constantly praying. Her mind was lost in prayer. Her fingers were busy doing what? Telling the beads of the rosary. माला जप रही थी वहाँ पे भी वो, ठीक है. Silently she kissed my forehead, ठीक है. And when I left, I cherished. What do you mean by to cherish something? To happily remember something. To keep it in your mind. ठीक है, मैंने हमेशा वो अपने मन में रखा, अपने दिल में रखा. क्यों? बिकॉज द मॉइस्ट इम्प्रिंट एज परहैप्स द लास्ट साइन ऑफ फिजिकल कॉन्टैक्ट बिटवीन अस. क्योंकि जब मैं वो जा रहा था तो मुझे लगा कि ये मेरी ग्रैंड मदर से शायद लास्ट बार मिलना है. सो दिस इज द लास्ट साइन ऑफ फिजिकल. हर किस ऑन माई फोरहेड वॉज अकॉर्डिंग टू मी द लास्ट साइन ऑफ फिजिकल कॉन्टैक्ट बिटवीन मी एंड माई ग्रैंड मदर. फॉलो आ रहा है समझ आपको सबको? आ रहा है, ठीक है. But that was not so. ऐसा नहीं हुआ. After 5 years I came back and was met by her at the station. She was there to see me off. She was there to welcome me. ठीक है, जब मैं 5 साल बाद आया वो रेलवे स्टेशन पे खड़ी थी, ठीक है, मुझे वेलकम करने के लिए. She did not look a day older. वो बिल्कुल वैसी की वैसी. पहले 20 साल से मैं उनको ऐसे ही देख रहा था. अब मैं 5 साल के लिए गया, अभी भी वो वैसी थी. कुछ नहीं उनमें चेंज आया. She still had no time for words. अभी भी वो वैसी की वैसी थी. In her nature, in her characteristics also, कि बातें नहीं करती थी वो बिल्कुल भी, ठीक है. वो सारा टाइम क्या करती थी? सिर्फ pray. And while she clasped me in her arms, while she just hugged me, तब क्या हुआ? I could hear her reciting her prayers. मुझे आवाज़ आई वही उनकी वही prayer. Even on the first day of my arrival, मैं पहले दिन आया था 5 साल बाद. Her happiest moments were with her sparrows. अपनी चिड़ियों के साथ ही उनका सबसे अच्छा टाइम था. And she fed them longer and with frivolous tributes. मगर उस दिन वो इतनी खुश थी, so she fed them for a longer time, more than half an hour. and with frivolous rebukes. What do you mean by frivolous? Frivolous means something which you do not very seriously. ठीक है, मतलब डांटना फटकारना. रिब्यूक मीन्स टू स्कोल्ड, डांटना, मगर सीरियसली नहीं, प्यार से, अफेक्शनेटली. ठीक है, अफेक्शनेट डांटना. तो ऐसे वो उनको डांट रही थी. किनको डांट रही थी? स्पैरोज. ठीक है. In the evening, a change came over her. And what was that change? She did not pray. That was the first time in my life that I had seen my grandmother not praying. ठीक है. She collected, और उन्होंने क्या किया प्रे करने की बजाय? She collected the women of the neighborhood. She got an old drum and she started to sing. सारी लेडीज को इकट्ठा कर दिया आस पड़ोस की और ड्रम बजाना शुरू कर दिया, गाना गाना शुरू कर दिया. For several hours she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum. What is sagging skin? एक ड्रम जिसकी स्किन लूज हो गई हो, सैगिंग, लटक रही हो. Dilapidated drum, a worn out drum which needs repair. ऐसा ड्रम जिसको थोड़ा फटे हाल है. ठीक है. ओके. सो एंड शी sang of the homecoming of warriors. और किसके बारे में गाया उन्होंने? अबाउट वॉरियर्स, सोल्जर्स जो जंग जीत के आते हैं, और कितनी खुशी होती है देशवासियों को. ऐसे गाने गाए उन्होंने. एंड वी हैड टू परसुएड हर टू स्टॉप टू अवॉइड ओस. शी वाज सो ओल्ड. वी हैड टू कन्विंस हर. टू परसुएड समवन मींस व्हाट? ऑनलाइन स्टूडेंट्स वेक अप. टू परसुएड मींस टू कन्विंस. ठीक है. हमें उनको मनाना पड़ा कि भाई बस करो, बीमार हो जाओगे. ठीक है. इतना मत स्ट्रेस लो, इतना मत स्ट्रेन करो, इतना मत थको आप. ठीक है. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. The next morning she was taken in. अगले दिन वो सुबह बीमार हो गई. It was a mild fever and the doctor told us that it would go. डॉक्टर को हमने बुलाया. डॉक्टर ने बोला कि कोई बात नहीं, हल्का फुल्का बुखार है, चला जाएगा. But my grandmother thought differently. मेरी grandmother ने बोला नहीं. She told us that her end was near. उन्होंने बताया हमें, क्या बताया? That she was going to die. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray, she was not going to waste any more time talking to us. क्या मतलब इसका? कि अपनी मरने से कुछ घंटे पहले उन्होंने प्रे नहीं किया था ना अभी पिछले दिन पहले. तो अब वो और बिल्कुल टाइम नहीं वेस्ट करेंगी बातें करने में. अब वो सिर्फ क्या करेंगी? भगवान को याद करेंगी, प्रे करेंगी. वी प्रोटेस्टेड. हमने बोला नहीं, आराम करो. ठीक है. बट शी इग्नोर्ड आवर प्रोटेस्ट. शी ले पीसफुली इन बेड प्रेइंग एंड टेलिंग हर बीड्स. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lips. She was praying, constantly she was praying, and all of a sudden she died. She just passed away. A peaceful pallor. What is pallor? Paleness. Her face had turned pale. But even after she died, there was so much of peace and calmness on her face. And we knew that she was dead. We lifted her off the bed. And as is customary. What is customary, बच्चे? What do you mean by customary? हाँ जी. Yes. जो आपके रीति रिवाज होते हैं, ritual, yes, yes. So we laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. What is a shroud? A coffin cloth. ठीक है. After a few hours, and what is coffin cloth? कफन इसको बोलते हो. ठीक है. After a few hours of mourning, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. उनके last rites के लिए हम arrangements करने चले गए. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. ठीक है. Cremation के लिए उनको ले जाने के लिए हम stretcher लेके गए. And that stretcher was a very crude one. And what is crude? Not very refined. ठीक है. ऐसे जो stretcher हमको मिला वहाँ से. ठीक है. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. Sunset का time था. Golden light से उनका पूरा room भरा पड़ा था. ठीक है. We stopped halfway in the courtyard. हम अंदर नहीं जा पाए. We had to stop halfway. Why? Because all over the veranda and in her room, right up to where she lay dead and stiff, wrapped in the red shawl, thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. ठीक है. वरांडा से लेकर वहां तक जहां तक उनकी डेड बॉडी पड़ी थी, हमारा सारा घर किससे भरा हुआ था? हजारों स्पैरोज से. ठीक है. Thousands of sparrows. There was no chirping. They were not making any noise. And look at the contrast. When she was there with them, they created a veritable bedlam of chirpings. Now there was no chirping at all. They did not chirp. They did not chirp at all. And we felt very sorry for the birds. हमें बड़ा बुरा लगा उनके लिए. ठीक है. And my mother fetched some bread for them. मेरी मदर को लगा कि grandmother हमेशा इनको bread crumbs खिलाया करती थी. मेरी mother भी bread ले आई. ठीक है. And she broke it into little crumbs. और छोटे छोटे टुकड़े करके जैसे मेरी grandmother उनको डालती थी वैसे ही डालती. The way my grandmother used to, and just throw it to them. The sparrows took no notice of the bread. So what are the sparrows? What were they? What were they there for? They were there for paying their tribute to the lady who had loved them so much, who had fed them for so many years. You know that now it was different. They was also showing their affection towards the grandmother. Okay. When we carried my grandmother's corpse away, what is corpse? Dead body. When they just lifted her off and put her to the stretcher and carried her off, all the sparrows just flew away quietly. Okay. And the next morning, they didn't even eat one single breadcrumb. Next morning, the sweeper swept. झाड़ू से उसने सारे breadcrumbs को dustbin में. Okay. So this is a loving tribute by Khushwant Singh towards his grandmother. So we would be discussing the questions tomorrow, online and offline together, the same day. Okay, please join in time and don't join by some, by some devil or by some. Yes, you have to make, and one more thing, you need to make a register for English. You need to make a register and you have to make an index for that. Only one register would do. It is not required of you that you make separate registers for this book and another book and the other book and for grammar and for writing section. No, I just need one register and you need to submit your work timely. I will be sending your work to you people and I would create Google Classroom. You need to join it with the class code. Homework would be sent in, has to be sent in PDF form in Google Classroom. Got it?